The Symphony of Atlanta's gridlock was a familiar grating tune. On the I-75, thousands of cars sat motionless under the oppressive Georgia sun, a river of stagnant steel and frustration. Inside the silent, climate-controlled sanctuary of his Mercedes Maybach, Damian Vance felt none of it. The city's chaos was a muted film playing outside his double-paned windows. His own frustration was colder, sharper sourced not from the traffic, but from a multi-million-dollar acquisition that was threatening to unravel. The numbers on his tablet glowed with silent accusation. "Sir, looks like we'll be here a while," his driver, a stoic man named Arthur, said through the intercom, his voice a calm island in Damian's sea of irritation. Damian didn't look up. "It doesn't matter. The deal is already sinking." As the car inched forward and stopped again near a busy intersection, the familiar dance began. Figures emerged from the concrete margins, weaving between idling cars with outstretched hands and practiced expressions of despair. It was a scene Damian witnessed daily, a part of the city's ugly, unavoidable wallpaper. He sighed, a sound of pure, detached routine. Arthur, the window. The tinted glass slid down with a whisper. Damian reached into the console, pulling out a small stack of crisp $20 bills he kept for this exact purpose. He didn't make eye contact. He never did. He simply extended his hand, letting the wind catch the bills and deliver them to the nearest set of eager fingers. It wasn't charity, it was a transaction, a toll he paid to the city's ghosts to quiet the nagging whisper of his own immense privilege, a mechanical absolution before he returned to the clean, logical world of balance sheets and stock prices. He was about to press the button to raise the window when a new figure caught his eye. She was different. While the others held their ground waiting for the handout, she moved with a desperate, unsteady purpose. A woman, though it was hard to tell her age beneath the grime and the hollowed-out landscape of her face. Her clothes were layers of rags, her hair a tangled mess that hung over her shoulders like withered vines. She ignored a $20 bill fluttering on the pavement and bypassed a man who tried to speak to her. Her focus was singular, locked onto his car, onto him. She reached the Maybach just as Arthur began to raise the window. A frail, dirty hand tapped gently on the glass. "Ignore her," Damian said, his voice flat, already turning his attention back to his tablet. But she didn't leave. She tapped again, more insistently this time. Her face was now level with his, just inches of reinforced glass separating his world from hers. She was whispering something, but the words were lost to the city's drone. Damian glanced up, annoyance flashing in his eyes, ready to deliver a sharp command to his driver. And then he froze. His breath caught in his throat. The tablet suddenly felt impossibly heavy in his hands. It wasn't her gaunt cheeks or the desperation etched into her skin that held him captive. It was her eyes. Beneath the exhaustion and the fog of suffering, he saw it. A flicker of a memory, a ghost of a light he once knew better than his own reflection. They were eyes that had once sparkled with laughter over candlelit dinners, eyes that had wept with joy on their wedding day, eyes he had last seen filled with anger and betrayal across a sterile lawyer's desk. The world outside his window dissolved. The blaring horns, the shimmering heat, the angry city, it all vanished. There was only the haunting familiarity of that gaze. It couldn't be, but it was. It was Simone. For a long moment, Damian Vance did not breathe. The world outside, with its angry symphony of car horns and the shimmering waves of heat rising from the asphalt, ceased to exist. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculated risks, had been breached by a single impossible sight. He stared at the woman, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were telling him. It was a face from another life, a ghost wearing unfamiliar, ragged flesh. The mind plays tricks, he told himself. It was stress. It was the failing acquisition. It was a random, cruel coincidence of features on a stranger's face. But the more he looked, the more the denial crumbled. He saw the ghost of the woman he had married. He remembered the precise curve of her smile when she was genuinely happy, a rare and beautiful thing. He remembered the specific shade of her eyes, a warm brown that could turn to dark amber in the sunlight, the same eyes that were now wide with a hunted, terrified look. The memory was so vivid it was painful, a phantom limb of a life he had surgically removed years ago. He could almost smell the faint scent of gardenias she used to wear, a scent now brutally replaced by the sour odor of the street. The woman he remembered was vibrant, intelligent, a whirlwind of passion and ambition, who had challenged him and completed him right before she had broken him. The woman outside his window was a hollowed-out shell, a fragile echo of that memory seemingly broken by the world in ways he could never have imagined. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. This was no stranger. This was no coincidence. This was Simone Brooks, his ex-wife, and the sight of her in this state shattered the careful order of his universe. The past was no longer the past. It was here, tapping on his window, begging for scraps. With a surge of adrenaline that was part ice and part fire, he pressed the button to lower the window. The sound of the city rushed in hot and loud, breaking the sterile silence of the car. The spell was broken. This was real. His voice, when it came out, was not a shout. It was something far more dangerous. It was a low, controlled whisper, sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Simone," he asked the name, feeling foreign and bitter on his tongue. "Is that really you?" At the sound of her name spoken by that voice, Simone flinched as if struck. The vacant, desperate look in her eyes was replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. Recognition dawned on her face, followed swiftly by a wave of crushing shame. She took a stumbling step back from the car, her hands coming up as if to shield herself. She shook her head, muttering words that were lost in the traffic. "No, please, no," her expression seemed to plead. She looked like a cornered animal searching for any possible escape route. Her instinct was to flee, to melt back into the anonymity of the crowd, to become a ghost once more. She turned ready to disappear into the labyrinth of cars and desperate faces. But Damien would not allow it. He couldn't. This specter had risen from the grave of his past, and he would not let it vanish again without answers. The neat narrative of their ending, the one he had told himself for 4 years, had just been proven a lie. The anger began to build a cold, hard knot in his chest, an anger born not of hatred, but of a profound, disorienting confusion. He had given her a clean break. He had provided for her. The divorce had been bitter, but it had been final. He had signed the papers, transferred the funds, and closed that chapter of his life. He had built an empire on order and predictability, and the scene unfolding before him was an assault on everything he understood. He leaned across the seat, his voice dropping even lower, an intense growl meant only for her. He needed to know. He needed the chaos to make sense. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his words precise and sharp. "Where is it, Simone? Where is the $500,000 I gave you?" The question fell between them heavier than any physical blow. It was the heart of the matter, the central mystery that eclipsed everything else. It was not a question about her well-being, not an offer of help. It was an accusation, a demand for an accounting of a past he thought was settled. The honking from the cars behind them grew more insistent, a frantic pulse urging the world to move on. But for Damien and Simone, trapped in that moment of shocking reunion time, stood still, suspended by the weight of that one impossible question. The world snapped back into focus with the blare of a truck horn directly behind them. The traffic was beginning to move, but Damien's Maybach remained a stationary island in the flowing river of cars. His question about the money still hung in the thick, humid air, unanswered. Simone simply stared at him, her eyes a vast abyss of a pain he couldn't begin to comprehend. He saw her tremble, a deep, shuddering tremor that ran through her entire body. She was going to break or she was going to run. He could not allow either to happen. Not here. Not in the middle of I-75 with the entire world as a witness. All logic, all calculated business acumen evaporated. A raw, primal instinct took over. It was a complex storm of anger, shame, and a deeply buried, unwelcome sense of possession. He could not tolerate the sight of his past, his failure, his Simone looking like this for one more second. He would not have this reckoning in public. Without another word, he reached across, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped out into the oppressive heat. The sudden noise of the city was a physical blow. He ignored the shouts from other drivers. His focus was entirely on Simone. He grabbed her arm. It was shockingly thin, as fragile as a bird's wing beneath his strong grip. "Get in the car," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. Now." Simone resisted, weakly pulling back with a pathetic whimper. "No, please let me go. Damien, please." Her using his name, her pleading, only fueled his resolve. He wasn't thinking. He was only acting, pulling her around the front of the car and opening the passenger door. He practically bundled her inside her frail body, collapsing onto the ridiculously expensive hand-stitched leather seat. He slammed the door shut, stalked back to his side, and got in the entire event, taking less than 20 seconds. "Arthur, go!" he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Now!" But it was too late. 20 seconds had been more than enough. The first sign of trouble was a single smartphone held aloft by a young man in the car next to them. The small red light of the recording was like a malevolent eye. Then came the first shout, a voice cutting through the traffic's hum. "Hey, what is that rich guy doing to that poor woman?" The accusation acted like a spark on dry tinder. Heads turned. More phones appeared. The narrative was simple, powerful, and instantly understood by everyone watching. A wealthy man in a luxury car was physically forcing a destitute, helpless woman into his vehicle. It was a scene straight from a dark fairy tale, a story of power and victimhood playing out in real time. The initial whispers turned into a low, angry murmur that grew in volume with each passing second. Then someone recognized him. A woman's voice shrieked, "Oh my God, that's Damian Vance, the CEO of Vance Innovations." The name changed everything. He was no longer an anonymous rich man. He was a public figure, a celebrity in the world of tech and finance. The story now had a famous villain. The crowd's energy shifted from general concern to a kind of predatory excitement. They were no longer just witnesses, they were participants in a breaking news scandal. The mass of people, previously just bystanders and fellow drivers, began to press closer. They abandoned their cars, drawn by the irresistible gravity of the unfolding drama. Is he kidnapping her? Did you see the way he grabbed her? Someone call the police. The Maybach was now completely surrounded. Hands began to bang on the tinted windows, the thuds echoing inside the silent cabin. Faces contorted with anger and morbid curiosity pressed against the glass. The phones were everywhere, their lenses like 1,000 unblinking eyes capturing every second of his private nightmare and broadcasting it to the world. Inside the car, the chaos outside was a muted, terrifying roar. Simone had curled into a tight ball on the seat, her hands covering her head as if to block out the world. Sobs racked her tiny frame. She was trapped in a fishbowl, the center of a public shaming she had desperately tried to avoid. Damian sat rigidly, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. He was trapped too. The feeling of absolute control that defined his life had been utterly stripped away. He had acted on impulse, and in doing so had walked directly into a cage. "Arthur," Damian said, his voice dangerously calm, "get us out of here." Arthur, a man who was formerly in the military and had seen far worse, simply nodded. He did not panic. He put the car in gear. He laid on the horn a long, powerful blast that momentarily startled some in the crowd. He began to inch the car forward, slowly, deliberately parting the sea of angry people. It was an agonizingly slow process. For every foot gained, the crowd seemed to surge back in, unwilling to let their story go. Finally, Arthur saw a small opening and skillfully navigated the large vehicle through it. The car broke free. He accelerated smoothly, leaving the shouting mob and the flashing phones behind. Silence descended once more inside the Maybach, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with shame and unspoken accusations. Damian stared ahead, but he didn't see the road. He saw only the reflection in the window of his own furious, panicked face. He had made a catastrophic mistake. He had tried to contain a ghost from his past, but all he had done was turn her and himself into a spectacle for the entire world to see. The Maybach merged onto the highway, a black phantom gliding effortlessly through the afternoon traffic. For a brief, deceptive moment, there was a sense of escape. The noise of the crowd was gone, replaced by the hushed whisper of the engine and the perfectly engineered climate control. They were in a bubble of luxury once more, a world away from the chaos they had just left behind. But the real danger was not on the street. It was already inside the car, silent and waiting. It began with a single vibration. Damian's phone, resting on the center console, buzzed once. He ignored it, then it buzzed again and again. Soon, it was no longer buzzing intermittently. It was vibrating in a continuous, frantic tremor, a trapped and angry thing. The screen lit up, a constant waterfall of notifications cascading down its surface. Texts, emails, alerts from news apps, mentions on every social media platform imaginable. It was the digital scream of a world that had just found its newest villain. With a sense of cold dread, Damian picked up the device. His thumbprint unlocked a screen that was a battlefield. The first thing he saw was a text from his chief legal counsel, Jessica. It was in all capital letters. Call me now. Do not talk to anyone. Below it was a message from his COO. Stock is dropping. What is happening? Then a dozen more from board members, investors, and his head of public relations. He swiped away the messages and opened Twitter. It was the #1 trending topic in the United States. #Damian Vance. He tapped it and his own face stared back at him. He was seeing the event from a dozen different angles, all captured on shaky phone cameras. He saw himself, a figure of immense wealth and power, grabbing the arm of a woman who looked like she could be broken by a strong wind. He saw the fear in Simone's eyes, a fear that the internet had now collectively decided was fear of him. The videos had millions of views already, and they were multiplying by the second. The headlines were brutal and swift. Billionaire CEO Damian Vance in shocking public altercation. Kidnapping tech mogul forces homeless woman into luxury car. The real face of corporate greed. The comments section was a cesspool of righteous fury. People were calling for boycotts. They were dissecting his life, his company, his past. They were judge, jury, and executioner, and they had already reached a verdict. He was a monster. He clicked on a link to a major news outlet. They had already written a short article pieced together from the viral videos and his public profile. It painted a damning picture. They questioned his character, his ethics. They brought up old, unrelated business controversies. The story was no longer about what had actually happened. It was about the narrative. And the narrative was that a powerful man had abused his power in the most public and shocking way. He felt a wave of nausea. He had spent 2 decades meticulously building his reputation, crafting an image of a tough but fair innovator. And it had all been torn down in less than 10 minutes. His phone began to ring, the sharp, piercing sound cutting through the heavy silence in the car. It was Jessica. He answered, his voice a low rasp. "What's the damage?" "Damage." Jessica's voice was strained, stripped of its usual calm authority. "Damian, this is a Category 5 hurricane. The stock has dropped 4% in the last 20 minutes. That's a $2 billion loss in market value. The board is in an emergency session. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have called my office. I am getting alerts from every major network. You need to tell me what happened, and you need to tell me right now because we are in free fall." Damian looked over at Simone. She had finally stopped crying, but she remained huddled on the seat, staring out the window, looking at a world that was now talking about her, pitying her, and using her as a symbol of his cruelty. She seemed completely unaware of the digital firestorm she was at the center of. In that moment, the initial personal conflict, the mystery of the $500,000 seemed like a distant memory. That was a private puzzle. This was a public war. The world was not asking what happened to Simone. The world was asking what he had done to her. He realized with a chilling clarity that the two questions were now the same. The only way to save his company, his reputation, and everything he had built was to uncover the truth of her story. She was no longer just a ghost from his past. She was the key. She was the only one who could provide the context that could transform him from a villain back into a human being in the public eye. His need for answers was no longer just about closure. It was about survival. He ended the call with Jessica promising to meet her within the hour. He turned to his driver. "Arthur," he said, his voice now devoid of panic and filled with a cold new resolve. "Change of plans. Take us to the penthouse at the Sovereign. Use the private entrance." He looked at Simone again. Her past held the key to his future, and he was going to unlock it whatever the cost. The Sovereign was the highest residential building in Atlanta, a glass needle that pierced the sky. Damian's private penthouse was at its very peak, a silent, sterile palace floating above the city's noise. He brought Simone here not out of kindness but for control. It was a fortress, a place with private elevators and security teams who answered only to him. It was a golden cage. The floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a breathtaking panorama of the sprawling city below, but the view offered no comfort. It only highlighted the immense distance between his world and the one she had just been dragged from. He watched as she stood dripping on the pristine Italian marble floor of the foyer, a small broken thing completely out of place amidst the minimalist opulence. He made a call. Within 20 minutes, a selection of clothes from a luxury boutique arrived along with a cart from the hotel's finest restaurant laden with covered silver dishes. He instructed the staff to leave everything by the door. He laid the clothes out on the king-sized bed in the guest suite. Soft cashmere sweaters, tailored pants, silk blouses. A world of comfort in fabric form. He uncovered the dishes, releasing the fragrant steam of gourmet food. Roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, warm bread. Simple, nourishing things. He placed a bottle of water on the nightstand. These were the tools of his world. Problems were solved with money, with access, with the application of superior resources. He was offering her a return to civilization as he understood it. But Simone did not move. She remained on the edge of the bed where she had sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She did not look at the food. She did not touch the clothes. She did not drink the water. Her gaze was fixed on a point on the far wall, her eyes utterly vacant, as if she had retreated to a place deep inside herself where he could not reach her. She was a statue of misery, a silent, damning protest against the gilded comfort he was trying to impose on her. Damien began to pace. He was a man of action, of data points and definitive outcomes. Silence was a variable he could not compute. He felt the phantom vibration of his phone in his pocket, a constant reminder of the digital storm raging outside these walls. His lawyers were demanding a strategy. His board was demanding answers. His entire empire was teetering on the edge of a public relations abyss, and the only person who held the key to his salvation was this silent, broken woman. His patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of her, planting his feet and forcing his presence into her empty line of sight. "Look at me, Simone," he began, his voice dangerously low. "I have put my career, my reputation, everything I have built for the last 20 years on the line for you today. My company is bleeding value by the second because of a 30-second video of us, a video that exists because I couldn't leave you on that street." He took a deep, steadying breath, trying to contain the raw frustration in his voice. "I have earned a little bit of your cooperation. I have earned the right to an explanation. The least you can do is talk to me." He knelt down slightly, trying to meet her gaze. "I am asking you one more time. Tell me what happened. Tell me how the woman I knew ended up on a street corner in rags. Tell me where the $500,000 went." He waited. The only sound in the vast, empty room was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Her silence was his answer. It was a wall of glass, stronger and more impenetrable than the windows that separated them from the rest of the world. And it was driving him mad. Just as Damien was about to turn away in disgust, something inside Simone finally broke. It was not his anger or his pleading that reached her. It was the profound, soul-deep exhaustion of a person who could no longer carry the weight of her own story. A single dry sob escaped her lips, a sound like cracking earth. She took a shuddering breath, and when she finally spoke, her voice was a hoarse, brittle whisper, a ghost of the voice he remembered. He said it was for Leo. She began, her eyes still fixed on the wall. That's what he always said. She started her story not with emotion, but with a chilling, detached clarity, as if she were a court stenographer reading back a tragic testimony. She spoke of the days after their divorce, of her fear and uncertainty as a newly single mother. And then she spoke of her brother Jamal. He had come to her not as a brother, but as a savior. He had been so convincing, his words a warm balm on her raw nerves. She recounted his manipulative speeches from memory, her voice taking on a distant quality. "You don't have to worry about a thing, Simone," he had told her, his arm around her shoulder. "This money isn't for you, it's for Leo's future, his education, his life. You can't manage this on your own. You're too emotional. Let me handle it. I'll invest it, grow it. We are family. Family protects its own." She told Damien how she had believed him, how she, lost in a fog of grief and fear, had gratefully handed over control of the settlement funds. It felt like a weight being lifted. It felt like safety, but the safety was an illusion. The trap snapped shut slowly at first. There were small deductions for Leo's school supplies, for his clothes, then larger sums for family business investments that were always just about to pay off. When she questioned him, Jamal would turn it back on her, his voice full of false concern. "Are you saying you don't trust me, Simone? Are you saying I would hurt my own nephew?" "This is for Leo." The final brutal confrontation happened about a year ago. She had demanded to see the bank statements, her last bit of defiance flaring up. Jamal had gathered the family, her other siblings, their spouses. They sat her down not as a sister but as a defendant on trial. They presented her with a handwritten ledger of her debts. This, Jamal had said, his voice cold and hard, is for the 16 years you lived in this house rent-free before you married your prince. This is compensation for the private schools we couldn't afford. And this, he pointed to a huge figure at the bottom, is our share of the good life. You lived like a queen on that man's money while we worked. This settlement wasn't for you. It was the debt you owed this family. They had taken everything, every last cent. They called it justice. They called it repayment. When she screamed and cried, they threw her out. Her last memory was of Jamal standing in the doorway of the house she grew up in. His eyes were not angry, they were empty. You have nothing because you are nothing, he had told her. And if you ever go to the police or try to see Leo again, I will make sure you disappear for good. She finished her story. The whisper died in her throat, leaving a silence in the vast hotel suite that was heavier and more terrible than before. The full, monstrous truth of her ordeal now hung in the air between them, a horror far worse than anything Damien could have possibly imagined. The silence that followed Simone's story was a heavy, suffocating thing. Damien stood motionless by the window. The glittering lights of Atlanta spread out beneath him like a carpet of fallen stars, but he saw none of it. His mind was replaying her words, a horrifying narrative of familial cruelty and calculated betrayal. The $2 billion hole in his company's market value, the public relations firestorm, all of it seemed to shrink in the face of the human horror she had just described. He had viewed their divorce as the end of a partnership, a bitter but clean transaction. He now understood that for her it had been the beginning of a descent into hell, a fall orchestrated by her own blood. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time since she had gotten in his car, and he saw not just the ghost of his ex-wife, but a survivor of a war he never knew she was fighting. Just as he was about to speak, to offer some inadequate word of comfort or outrage, a sound cut through the stillness. It was not the sleek professional chime of his own phone. It was a tinny, jarring ringtone, a cheap electronic melody that sounded obscene in the opulent suite. The sound came from the pocket of Simone's ragged coat. She flinched as if the sound itself were a physical blow. Her entire body went rigid, and the fragile composure she had managed to gather shattered completely. A look of pure animal terror washed over her face. That reaction told Damien more than any words could. Whoever was calling it was not a friend. With a hand that trembled so violently she could barely control it, she pulled out a battered old phone. The screen was a spider web of cracks, the plastic casing worn smooth with use. The caller's name glowed on the screen. Jamal. Her breath hitched. She looked at Damien, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. A plea for what he wasn't sure. For him to make it stop. For him to disappear so she could take the call in private. He simply stood his ground, his expression unreadable. She finally answered, her voice a barely audible whisper. "Hello." She didn't need to put the phone on speaker. The voice on the other end was a furious roar, tinny and distorted by the cheap speaker, but perfectly clear in the silent room. It was the voice of a predator. "Where are you?" Jamal bellowed without any preamble. "I've been calling you for an hour. I saw the news, you stupid, worthless woman. What in God's name have you done? Are you trying to ruin us? Are you trying to send me to jail with your pathetic little sob story?" Damien watched as every drop of color drained from Simone's face. She swayed slightly, and he instinctively took a step closer, worried she might collapse. I didn't say anything," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I swear, Jamal, please." "You swear?" He mocked his laugh, a cruel, ugly sound. "Your promises are worthless, just like you. I saw the video. I see the headlines. They're looking for you. The whole world is looking for the poor, homeless woman the big bad billionaire supposedly kidnapped. You think you're safe with him. You think he can protect you from me." Jamal's voice dropped, losing its furious heat and taking on a cold, reptilian menace that was far more terrifying. "Listen to me very carefully, Simone. You are going to walk out of wherever you are, and you are going to disappear again. If you breathe one single word to him or to anyone else about that money, I will do what I promised. Leo will never see your face again. I will take him so far away you will spend the rest of your miserable life looking for him, and you will never find him. He will grow up hearing what a terrible mother he had, a mother who abandoned him for a rich man. Do you understand me?" Damien froze. Leo. The name echoed in the vast emptiness of the penthouse. Who was Leo? His mind raced a frantic calculation of dates and timelines. They had been divorced for 4 years. A child. It didn't make any sense. He stared at Simone, whose face had crumpled in utter devastation at the mention of the name. She wasn't just crying now. She was breaking apart, a silent scream tearing through her as she clutched the phone, whispering her son's name over and over like a prayer. "Leo, no, please not Leo." The call ended. The cheap phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the thick carpet. The silence that rushed back in was even more profound than before. It was a silence filled with a new, unthinkable question. Damien moved slowly, kneeling in front of her. His earlier anger, his frustration, it had all been burned away, replaced by a shocking, disorienting void. He spoke her name gently, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Simone, who is Leo?" That was what finally broke the dam. Her grief, her fear, her years of silent suffering came pouring out in a flood of gut-wrenching sobs. It took a long time before she could form words. Through her tears, she confessed the final, most painful secret of all. "He's my son," she whispered. Her voice choked with anguish. "He's our son." Damien felt the floor drop out from under him. Our son. She told him everything. How she had found out she was pregnant a month after the divorce papers were signed. How she had been so lost, so alone, so convinced that he hated her and would think she was trying to trap him. And how Jamal had been there, promising to help, promising they would raise the boy as a family, promising that it was better for the child to have a loving uncle than a father who didn't want him. She had kept the secret to protect her son from a rejection she was sure would come. And now Damien understood. He understood the true, monstrous nature of the trap. Leo wasn't just her child. He was her anchor, the chain that Jamal had used to bind her to him. Leo was the reason she endured homelessness, the reason she starved, the reason she never went to the police. Every ounce of her suffering had been a sacrifice to keep her son safe from the very man who claimed to be his protector. Her tragedy was not just a story of financial betrayal. It was the story of a mother's fierce, desperate love and the monster who was holding it hostage. A new, ice-cold clarity settled over Damien. This was no longer about a public relations crisis or a ghost from his past. This was about a child, his child, a son he never knew he had. The revelation of his son's existence acted like a switch inside Damien Vance. The chaos of the past few hours, the swirling emotions of shock, anger, and confusion all solidified into a single diamond hard point of focus. The public relations crisis, the plunging stock price, even the deep personal wound of Simone's betrayal years ago all became secondary. There was only one objective now, one non-negotiable outcome, the safety of the child, his child. He looked at Simone, who was still huddled on the floor, a portrait of profound grief. He saw not the architect of his public ruin, nor the ghost of a failed marriage. He saw the mother of his son, a woman who had been systematically broken and terrorized. And in that moment, he understood that this was not a problem to be managed with statements to the press or financial settlements. This was not an emotional entanglement to be resolved. This was a war to be won. He walked over to the minibar, poured a glass of water, and knelt in front of her, holding it out. His voice was different now. It was calm, devoid of anger, and filled with a chilling resolve that was more intimidating than any shout. "Simone, drink this," he said. It was not a request. She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen, and took the glass with a trembling hand. "He will never let me see Leo again," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You don't know what he's capable of." "Oh, I think I have a very clear picture," Damien replied, his gaze unwavering. "He is a bully and a coward who preys on the weak, and like all bullies, he has a fatal flaw. He's greedy. His greed is what got you into this mess, and it is the very thing we are going to use to get you out." Simone looked at him confused. "What are you talking about?" "Your brother thinks he has all the power," Damien explained, standing up and beginning to pace the room, not with frustration, but with the focused energy of a general planning a campaign. "He is holding your son hostage, and he is using my reputation as a weapon. He thinks he can blackmail me. He thinks he can scare you into silence. He believes he is in complete control." He stopped and turned to face her. "He wants money, so we are going to offer him money, a lot of it. We are going to give him exactly what he wants. Or rather, we are going to make him believe we are." A flicker of understanding followed by a wave of fear crossed Simone's face. "You want to set a trap." "Precisely," Damien said. "This is a chess game now, Simone, and I do not lose." Within minutes, the penthouse suite was transformed into a command center. Damien made a series of calls to his most trusted inner circle, his head of security, his personal lawyer, and a private investigator he kept on retainer. The plan was formulated with brutal efficiency. Damien would contact Jamal himself, playing the part of a desperate man willing to pay any price to make this scandal disappear. A meeting would be arranged for the following evening. The location was strategic. They would not meet in a neutral public space. They would meet at Aria, one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants, a place known for its privacy and impeccable service. It was also a place that Damien secretly owned through a holding company. The entire environment would be under his absolute control. The staff from the maitre d' to the busboys were his loyal employees. The security systems were his. Jamal would be walking onto Damien's home turf, blinded by his own arrogance and the illusion of a luxurious setting. While his team worked on the logistics, Damien focused on his most important asset, Simone. He knew that for the trap to work, Jamal had to believe she was still completely broken and terrified. He had to feel overconfident to let his guard down and incriminate himself without a second thought. "I need you to be an actor," Damien told her, his tone serious. "When you see him tomorrow, you cannot be the woman sitting in front of me now. You have to be the woman he threw out on the street. You have to look scared. You have to seem hopeless. Can you do that?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes again. "I don't know if I can. When I see him, all I feel is fear." "Good," Damien said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Use that fear. Let him see it. Let him think he has already won. But know in your heart that every second you are in that room, we are one step closer to getting Leo back. Every word he says is being recorded. Every threat he makes is another bar in the cell we are building for him." He spent the next few hours coaching her, going over every possible detail. He had her practice her posture, the way she would look down at the floor, the way her voice should tremble when she spoke. It was a painful, difficult process, forcing her to inhabit a weakness she was just beginning to escape. But with each run-through, something began to shift. The act of preparing for battle, of having a plan and a powerful ally, was kindling something within her that had been dormant for years. As dawn approached, casting a pale gray light over the city, they finally stopped. Simone looked exhausted, but her eyes were different. The vacant, haunted look was gone. In its place was a tiny, fragile spark of determination. She looked at Damien, who was reviewing security schematics on his tablet. She saw the powerful, ruthless businessman the world saw. But for the first time, she understood that his power was now aimed in her defense. It was aimed at her monster. For the first time in 4 years, Simone Brooks felt a glimmer of something she thought she had lost forever. It was not quite happiness, and it was not quite safety. It was hope. A dangerous, terrifying, and absolutely beautiful hope. Aria was a temple of modern fine dining, a place where power and influence were traded over plates of meticulously crafted food. The lighting was low, the music was a soft ambient hum, and the conversations were conducted in hushed, respectful tones. Damien had chosen their table with care. It was a secluded corner booth in a private alcove, offering the illusion of intimacy while being perfectly monitored by his security team. He sat opposite Simone, a glass of untouched water in front of him. He had perfected his role. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped, the very picture of a man worn down by a relentless public scandal. Simone played her part even better. She was a study in defeated misery, her gaze fixed on her lap, her hands trembling slightly. She looked exactly like the broken woman Jamal expected to see. Jamal Brooks arrived precisely on time. He strode into the restaurant not with the caution of a criminal, but with the swagger of a conquering hero. He wore a suit that was just a little too shiny, a watch that was a little too big. He radiated an aura of cheap arrogance. The maitre d', a man who had been on Damien's payroll for a decade, greeted him with practiced deference and led him to the alcove. "Damien, my man," Jamal said, sliding into the booth with a wide, smug grin. He barely glanced at his sister, dismissing her with a flick of his eyes. "I have to say, you certainly know how to pick a spot. Very classy." He acted as if they were two powerful men meeting to close a deal, equals in a game he was certain he was winning. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Jamal Damien said, his voice flat and weary, playing his part to perfection. "You know why we're here. My life has been turned upside down because of this situation. A terrible situation, Jamal agreed, a fake note of sympathy in his voice. I've been so worried about Simone. And of course the boy. It's a lot for a family to handle. A lot of stress, a lot of expense. He let the words hang in the air, a thinly veiled reference to his leverage. Damien leaned forward, rubbing his temples as if fighting a massive headache. He looked directly at Jamal, the picture of a man at the end of his rope. I don't care about the family drama. I care about my company's stock price and the headlines with my name in them. I want this to go away, quietly and permanently. He paused, then asked the question that was the entire point of this charade. How much? Jamal's smug smile widened. He had him. He leaned back against the plush leather, savoring his moment of triumph. He looked around the opulent restaurant, then back at Damien, his eyes gleaming with greed. It's not just about money, Damien, he said, drawing out the moment. It's about securing a future. A quiet future for Simone and for Leo. A future far away from here where they won't be a problem for you anymore. He steepled his fingers, looking every bit the amateur villain from a bad movie. $1 million, he said, the number rolling off his tongue with relish. You transfer $1 million to an offshore account. In return, I take my sister and the boy, and we disappear. You never hear from us again. The source of your scandal is gone. Your problem is solved permanently. He finished with a confident smirk, absolutely certain that he held all the cards. The trap was now set. The bait had been taken. Damien held Jamal's gaze for a long moment. He let the silence stretch, a perfect performance of a man weighing an agonizing decision. He sighed a deep theatrical sound of resignation and gave a slow, defeated nod. He then glanced at Simone, a flicker of his eyes, the almost imperceptible signal they had rehearsed a dozen times. This was her moment. This was her move to make. He saw the flash of terror in her eyes, the instinct to shrink back, to obey, to survive as she had for 4 long years. But then he saw something else take over. He saw the memory of her son's face, the thought of his laughter, the fierce primal power of a mother's love. It burned away the fear, leaving behind a core of pure, unyielding steel. Slowly, deliberately, Simone lifted her head. She looked at her brother not with the eyes of a victim, but with the eyes of a judge. And then she stood up. Jamal stared at her, his expression shifting from triumph to annoyance. What are you doing? Sit down, he hissed. Her voice, when it came, trembled at first, just as they had practiced. But it grew stronger with every word, resonating with the weight of years of silent suffering. No, she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet alcove. No, Jamal. She took a step forward, a single powerful step that reclaimed her space in the world. I spent 4 years being afraid of you. I let you take everything from me. My money, my home, my dignity. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. You used my own son to control me. You left me with nothing. She looked him directly in the eye. Not anymore. There will be no more money. There will be no more deals. It's over. Jamal's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. He started to rise from his seat, his hand raised as if to strike her. You ungrateful... He never finished the sentence. At that exact moment, the door to the adjoining private dining room opened smoothly. A man and a woman in professional business suits stepped out. They did not look like police officers, but they moved with a quiet, unmistakable authority that froze Jamal in place. His head whipped back and forth from the calm officers to Simone's determined face, and finally to Damien. The weary, defeated mask was gone from Damien's expression. His face was now a cold, placid surface, his eyes holding the flat, merciless gaze of a predator that had just watched its prey walk into a perfectly laid snare. Damien spoke, his voice calm and utterly devoid of emotion, each word a hammer blow. Jamal Brooks, every word you have uttered since you sat down at this table has been recorded on both high-definition audio and video. Your offer to sell my son for $1 million was particularly compelling evidence. He gave a slight nod towards the 2 individuals who were now flanking their table. These are detectives with the Atlanta Police Department's Major Crimes Division. I believe they have some questions for you regarding extortion, blackmail, and felony child endangerment. He leaned back, his work done. You have the right to remain silent. The color drained from Jamal's face. The arrogance, the confidence, the swagger, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a pathetic, sputtering panic. He looked like a cheap mannequin that had suddenly had its strings cut. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was quietly and efficiently escorted away, his fantasy of $1 million payday dissolving into the grim reality of handcuffs and a holding cell. In the silent alcove, Simone slowly sat back down. She took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first truly free breath she had taken in a very long time. The battle was over. The monster had been caged. The quiet efficiency with which Jamal Brooks was removed from the restaurant was a testament to Damien's power. There was no scene, no disruption. One moment a loud, arrogant man was making threats, the next he was gone, swallowed by the discreet machinery of the law that Damien had set in motion. The other patrons of Aria continued their meals completely unaware that a life-altering drama had just reached its climax in the corner alcove. But Damien felt no sense of triumph. Capturing the foot soldier was only the first step. The war for his reputation, a war being waged on 1 million screens across the globe, was still raging. He looked at his phone. It was still a relentless torrent of notifications. The video was everywhere. The arrest of Jamal would eventually become public knowledge, but without the proper context, it would only add fuel to the fire, another layer of violence and scandal attached to his name. This was a crisis of narrative, and it required a master storyteller to fix it. He knew only one person with the power, the connections, and the sheer force of will to wrestle a story like this into submission. His mother. Eleanor Vance was not merely a wealthy widow. She was the matriarch of the Vance dynasty, a woman of old money and even older secrets. She had stood by his father as he built their first company, navigating the treacherous social and political waters of Atlanta with a grace that masked a core of absolute steel. She operated in a world of quiet phone calls, of favors owed and collected, of reputations that were cultivated over generations and guarded with fierce jealousy. To Eleanor, the Vance family name was not just a label, it was a living entity, a legacy to be protected at all costs. Finding a quiet office in the back of the restaurant, Damien finally made the call. He knew this would be more difficult than facing down a blackmailer. Damien. Her voice came through the phone, crisp and controlled, as always. I have been expecting your call. My office has been tracking this situation for hours. Explain yourself. He took a breath and laid out the facts as concisely as he could. He told her about the encounter in the traffic jam, the viral video, the public outcry, and the catastrophic drop in the company's stock. He told her about the trap he had just set and the successful arrest of Jamal Brooks for extortion. He presented it as a problem that was now contained a fire that simply needed to be put out by an expert. He was appealing to her as a strategist, a crisis manager. So, you have the man in custody, Eleanor said, her tone unimpressed. That is a start, but it does not solve the root problem. The world still sees a video of you assaulting a homeless woman. Who is she? Here the conversation turned. This was the part he dreaded. Mother, he said, his voice dropping slightly. The woman is Simone. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice had lost any hint of warmth. I see. I warned you when you insisted on marrying that girl that her family was poison. I told you they were beneath us. She was a victim in this, Damien interjected, his own defensiveness rising. They stole everything from her. I am not interested in her life story. Damien, Eleanor cut him off sharply. I am interested in the survival of this family and the company that bears our name. Her poor choices have now become a multi-billion-dollar liability for us. Then Damien played his final, most important card. He told her the rest of the story, the part he had not even told his own lawyers yet. There is something else you need to know, he said, his voice quiet. She has a child, a son. His name is Leo. He paused. He is my son. The silence that followed this declaration was heavier and more profound than before. He had expected shock, anger, perhaps even a flicker of grandmotherly curiosity. He received none of it. Eleanor's response when it came was as cold and pragmatic as a surgeon's scalpel. This changes nothing except to make the situation more dangerous, she said, her voice like ice. The last thing we need is a secret child added to this public circus. The girl is a liability, and now she comes with an even greater one. The Vance family name will not be dragged through the mud and destroyed because of the mistakes of a foolish, desperate woman you divorced years ago. Her instructions were swift and brutal. This is what you will do. You will have your lawyers draft an agreement. Give her a sum of money enough to ensure her silence and her disappearance. Put her on a plane to somewhere far away and make sure she signs a document that forbids her from ever contacting you or mentioning your name again. Cut her loose. Do not get involved any further. This is not our problem to solve. She saw Simone not as a victim, not as the mother of her grandchild, but as a threat. A loose variable that needed to be neutralized for the good of the family. The battle with Jamal had been won, but Damien now realized he was facing an even more formidable opponent. His own mother. Damien stood in the quiet office, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the cold, pragmatic calculus of his mother's world. Her logic was flawless. It was the same ruthless logic he had applied to his business dealings for 2 decades. Identify the liability, mitigate the risk, protect the asset. From a strategic standpoint, she was right. Simone and the boy were a complication, a threat to the stability he had worked so hard to achieve. The easiest, cleanest path forward was to cut them loose, to erase them with money and distance. It was the smart move. It was the Vance family move. But as he stood there, his mind went back not to the chaos of the day, but to the quiet, lonely end of his marriage. He remembered the arguments, the nights he had come home to an empty dinner table, the weekends he had spent at the office instead of with his wife. He had told himself it was necessary, a sacrifice required to build an empire. He saw now with a clarity that was both painful and liberating that he had not just been building a company. He had been creating a void. He had been a husband in name, only leaving Simone emotionally isolated and vulnerable. And into that void her toxic family had crept. His neglect had not caused their greed, but it had created the perfect environment for it to flourish. He had pushed her away, and they had pulled her in. He realized with a sickening certainty that he was not an innocent party in her downfall. He had not stolen her money, but he had helped to unlock the door for the thieves who did. In that moment, the choice became clear. It was not a choice between family reputation and doing the right thing. It was a choice between the man he had been and the man he needed to become. The thought of Leo, a son he did not know, a small boy, being used as a pawn solidified his resolve. He could not protect his company by sacrificing his own humanity. He could not abandon the mother of his child a second time. He took a deep, steadying breath, the decision settling in his soul like solid ground beneath his feet. He spoke into the phone, his voice quiet but infused with an unshakable certainty that his mother had not heard from him in years. "Mom, I hear you," he said calmly, "and I understand your position completely, but this time you are wrong." He let the words sink in before he continued. "I failed her once. When we were married, I was so focused on building the future that I neglected the present. I left her alone, and when she was at her most vulnerable, the wolves came for her." His voice grew stronger, each word a vow. "I let her face those wolves alone. Not this time. That will not happen again." He paused, then delivered the final, undeniable truth. "She is the mother of my child, your grandson, and she needs to be protected. I am going to do the right thing no matter what the cost to the stock price or the family name. I will not abandon my son. I will not abandon her." A long silence stretched across the line. It was not an angry silence. It was a silence of recalculation. Eleanor Vance was a master strategist, and she knew how to recognize an immovable force when she encountered one. Her son's voice did not hold the heat of a temporary emotional outburst. It held the weight of a fundamental conviction. For the first time, her son was choosing a different kind of legacy. She might not have agreed with it, but she could not deny the strength of his resolve. The Vance family mansion was not a home. It was a monument to a dynasty. It stood in the heart of Buckhead, a fortress of old brick and ivy filled with dark wood, polished silver, and the silent, judging eyes of ancestral portraits. To enter its halls was to feel the immense weight of the family's history and legacy. For Simone, who had been brought there by Damien the following day, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a courtroom where she was about to be sentenced. She was clean now, wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress that Damien had provided. The clothes felt like a costume, a fragile layer of respectability over the raw wounds of her past. She stood in the center of a grand drawing room, a room larger than any place she had called home in years. Eleanor Vance was seated in a high-backed armchair by the fireplace, a queen upon her throne. She did not rise when Simone entered. She simply watched her approach, her eyes sharp and analytical, conducting a silent, thorough assessment. There was no warmth in her gaze, no hint of grandmotherly affection. It was the look of a master strategist evaluating a new, unpredictable piece on the chessboard. Damien stood near the window, a silent observer, allowing this crucial interaction to unfold. After a long, heavy silence, Eleanor finally spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the room with an undeniable authority. "I have been made aware of your situation," she said, her words precise and formal. "And my son has made his decision to involve himself and by extension this family very clear." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over Simone from head to toe. "So now let me make my position equally clear." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial yet menacing tone. "You are now under the protection of the Vance family name. That protection is a privilege, not a right. It can be withdrawn as quickly as it was given." Her eyes narrowed. "If you do anything, say anything, or act in any way that harms my son's reputation or the stability of this family a second time, I will personally ensure that you never get the chance to make a third mistake. Is that understood?" It was not a question. It was a declaration of terms. Simone, her heart pounding, could only give a small, jerky nod. Satisfied, Eleanor leaned back the audience with Simone now officially concluded. She turned her head, her attention shifting to the two men in dark suits who had been standing silently in the corner of the room, the head of her legal team and her chief of public relations. Her tone changed, losing its personal edge and becoming purely strategic. First, she commanded, her voice sharp as glass. "Do whatever is necessary to secure full and permanent legal custody of the child. I want him in this house. Spare no expense. Second, I want this media crisis terminated. I want our narrative, the true narrative of a family rescuing a mother and child from a dangerous criminal, to be the only story people hear by the end of this week. Get it done." The order was absolute. The machine of the Vance family was now in motion. The final scene of this chapter of their lives did not take place in a lavish mansion or a quiet home. It unfolded a week later in the glass and steel conference room of Atlanta's most powerful law firm. The media storm under the firm and invisible hand of Eleanor Vance had been skillfully redirected. The narrative had been reclaimed. Now the future was a legal battleground, and for the first time Simone was walking onto it not as a victim, but as a plaintiff. Damien stood by the window looking out at the city. Simone stood by the long mahogany table, a file of legal documents in front of her. There was a respectful distance between them, the space not of a broken couple, but of two new allies who understood the difficult road ahead. The frantic energy of the past week had settled into a quiet, focused resolve. The immediate crisis was over. The long war for justice was about to begin. Damien turned from the window and looked at her. His expression was serious, his voice clear and direct. "My mother's team has secured the best legal counsel in the state," he said, gesturing to the lead attorney in the room. "They will be your lawyers. I will finance this entire fight for as long as it takes to bring Leo home and to recover every dollar that was stolen from you." He continued, outlining his support. "I have already arranged for a secure apartment for you, and a position at one of my company's charitable foundations is waiting whenever you are ready. You will have stability, you will have resources, you will have your safety." He paused, and his next words were the most important. "But what I will not do, Simone, is fight this battle for you. I cannot fix what was broken between us, and I cannot give you back the strength that was taken from you. Only you can do that." He took a step closer, his eyes holding hers with a profound sense of respect. "From this moment forward, this is your fight. You have to be the one to face them in court. You have to be the one who finds her own voice again. You must do it for Leo, and more importantly, you must do it for yourself." Simone listened to his words, and she did not cry. She did not look for pity. Instead, she reached into her bag and took out her old battered phone. She swiped the cracked screen until it showed a picture of a bright-eyed, smiling little boy sitting on a swing. It was Leo. She stared at the image of her son, the reason for every tear she had shed, for every moment of hunger she had endured, for every ounce of pain she had survived. As she looked at his face, a quiet, powerful transformation took place. The last shadows of the victim, the last vestiges of the hopeless ghost on the street corner burned away. In their place, a fire was lit. It was the fierce, unyielding fire of a mother, the unshakable resolve of a warrior who had finally been handed a sword. She looked up from the phone, her gaze meeting Damien's. Her eyes were clear, steady, and shining with a strength he had never seen before. She gave a single, firm nod. "I'm ready," she said. Her journey to reclaim her life and her son had only just begun. True strength isn't about the absence of scars, but the courage to face the world despite them. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it unlocks the future. The greatest charity is not giving money, but empowering someone to reclaim their own life and dignity against all odds.